Servus and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 64. Right back at it again with the NCAA route this week. Another guy grew up in the Winnipeg area, went on to play for Colgate University as a player, had a long pro career afterwards, and now has returned to Colgate as the head coach. Happy to welcome on to the Pro Hockey Pod this week. Welcome, Mike Harder.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. I love the guitar riff at the start of your podcast too. It's great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Um, so at the start, I always like to kind of go back just to kind of, where it all began for you. So as I said, you were born in I believe in the North Winnipeg area there. Like, what's your kind of first childhood memory of growing up there?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town just south of the city, but it's all the same for most people anyhow. You guys in Ontario see Manitoba as just one kind of white blob, so that's okay. We get it. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, no other choice but to play hockey. Like, I loved it. Loved everything about it. I was lucky. My grandfather was the Zamboni driver, which I thought was the coolest thing at our local rink. So I could get all the ice I wanted and off peak hours. So it was great. So I just, the rink raised me in a big way. My grandmother ran the concession stand, and I was just there all the time, and I still am.
So being raised in a rink, I wanted to ask you too, like this would have been about the time I believe did the Winnipeg Jets have an influence on you as well? Being like Winnipeg, like it's all about the Jets, baby. So
Yeah, of course. Like Dale Howardchuk, Morris Lukowich was a big one for me. Yeah, I loved the Jets. I loved everything about them. I remember like my grandfather would take me to a game maybe twice a year, and it was just the best. I'd be so excited that whole day. We'd go to a game and then freeze because we had to park so far away, walking back to the car. But I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved that old arena, the big picture of the Queen hanging in one end. Yeah, the Jets had a huge influence on me.
and what was kind of your minor hockey path like? Obviously, me being from Toronto area, I'm not very familiar with out in
Yeah.
Winnipeg. Like I saw online it was the Eastman Selects, but was that kind of like a team that you played for all the way growing up?
No, it was again, it was just playing for my local team. I grew up in a town of 900 people and most of us were related. Little French speaking community. And we just played on that team. There were 10 of us. I remember trying to convince one of the kids in school to play goalie. We needed a goalie and this might sound like I'm really old, but we had, the community had pads for the goalie, the old brown leather pads, and so we got him to play goalie, and it was awesome. We were able to field the team, and I just played. Like I said, I love the play aspect of it, and hockey. There's so many games within a game you can have fun with. You can be by yourself on the rink, or you could be with 20 buddies. And I just played. So played just local youth hockey, which was great. And then by 15 years, then you decide and played AAA, and then from there you move on.
I was like asking to someone like yourself who went ended up eventually going the NCAA route. Obviously, when you were growing up, same with me, you have to make a choice early about the CHL route. Was there any thought in your head, around 16, 17 years old about the WHL?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm old enough to. I existed before the draft, so you're just on a list, so you're protected, and you'd find out like you were listed by somebody. So I was listed by Seattle, I think it was, and yeah, there's some thought to it, but I had this strong like intellectual curiosity early on, and I just wanted to go to college in a U.S. environment. I had the luxury of living, relatively close to North Dakota, UND, and I remember going to a game. I think we were at a 12U tourney or maybe even a 10U tourney, and I went to a game and saw some of the players. It was just the most amazing thing to me. It blew my mind. And I had one of my buddies, his uncle played at University of Maine, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I was just always drawn to it, to the, NCAA experience, I think. It just seemed really cool.
Which is something rare, I would say, for a Canadian, because obviously, as I mentioned, we grow up with all these, if it's OHL, WHL, whatever route, and then someone like yourself, like I think you being able to see it and experience that atmosphere at a
Yeah.
young age would have fueled the drive for that route versus like people like myself, in GTA, the closest team is like 6 hours away. So you're not making that drive.
Right. Which is why, like, as a staff, as a coaching staff, we try to get as many Canadian kids down to campus and prep schools and youth teams to come to a game and just to experience it and see it and walk them around campus. And yeah, because if it ignites that one kid's curiosity, that's a big deal. That's a win for us.
It's definitely the atmosphere is something else that reminds me kind of the North American version of what you see over here in Germany and stuff, the kind of hooligan-ness, the soccer football atmosphere they have over here. But
Yeah.
before you end up choosing Colgate, you had putting up some pretty good numbers there for the Weyburn Red Wings. Your last
Yeah.
year, 104 points, not bad. Um, I'm sure you had interest from multiple schools. How did you end up, deciding that Colgate was the choice for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, back then you could take 5 visits. Now it's unlimited. I mean, the college kids can do pretty much whatever they want now, it seems like, including making millions of dollars. Uh, but yeah, so it came down to the coach that was recruiting me here, both coaches, Don Vaughn, who I was part of his first recruiting class, and then I took over his chair here in this office 30 years later. They were just great. We just connected. They seemed to have genuine interest and they cared. I remember Stan Moore, the assistant coach. I was playing in Weyburn, and the Saskatchewan League back then was a good league. It was a really good league. The Notre Dame Hounds were hitting it, and there'd be more scouts at games at a Notre Dame game than there were fans. It was incredible. But Stan came to Weyburn to watch me play, and then drove. It was probably a snowstorm. It was every day, but he drove to Winnipeg or to my hometown to St. Adolphe to have dinner with my parents. 5 hours just to have dinner with my parents, and that was a big deal. It was a really big deal. I was like, wow, that's amazing. So I just felt that there's support there and love. Um, I took a lot from that actually. I made a point of it when I got this job last year to go to every kid's house. I did a road trip west to east, and had dinner or lunch. I forced myself. I invited myself over to every kid's place to meet their parents, meet their dogs, meet their cats, meet their everybody, and have break bread with them. And but that's because Stan Moore did that for me, and I thought it was an incredible gesture. I just felt. Well, I mean, there's no other way to say it. I felt loved. So that's why I chose Colgate. It was really great. That and I asked if I could be number 9, if I could have that number, which I knew I could because there was a senior leaving with it. So, but yeah, so that was it. It's a care factor.
The two things any recruit wants, they want their favorite number and they want to feel wanted, I think.
That's
So,
it.
no, I'm happy to hear that, that coach had an influence on you to now you use that as well in your coaching stint now at Colgate. For someone who obviously has only seen the rink and seen the goal light go on against me a couple times in the old Star Arena there, or whatever it was called. What's the campus like there in Colgate? Like, obviously there would have been that draw factor as well. Like, how's the city and everything as well?
Yeah. Well, I want to back up. I want you to tell us your story of your first college start. Where was it again?
It was in Colgate.
Yeah. What
Um,
happened?
uh, we lost, and you know what? Like, it was being a 19-year-old kid, and we had played in Cornell the night before.
Mhm.
And then we do the 2 game roadie there, and the next day, and I wasn't expecting to get a start, and my parents ended up driving down. It was good. First period went well for me. Second period had its ups and downs, and then the end of the
Yeah.
day, I was just happy to get some experience playing NCAA because I think that was my first start. I think that was game like 7 for us. I just sat as a freshman and was hoping to get time. But
Nice.
this episode's about you and not about me and my failures. So let's get back to
No, please. No, that's huge. Playing your first NCAA game. It's a fun Colgate connection. It just shows how small the hockey world is. I love it. I love all that. So Colgate, yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to see the campus, but it's right out of a movie set, and especially in the fall, the colors are insane. It's like a shiny castle up on a hill. It's beautiful. It's older than our country. It's 1819 was when Colgate was formed. So it's beautiful. The history is amazing. And then, our athletic facilities are down the hill, which is nice. And the facilities are great. Everybody's happy and, studious. Again, it's like an idyllic movie set. It's beautiful.
it sounds really really nice. Obviously, when we were there, we only just went right to the rink and that
Right.
was it. So didn't getting a chance to tour. So
Right.
you're not playing your 4 years there. Your last year, at least on Elite Prospects, it said you were the captain. I'm going to go off that. But you also which I thought was really cool. You were a Hobie Baker finalist. So for those listening who aren't so familiar with maybe the NCAA route, that is basically player of the year for NCAA, which is obviously with how many schools there are out there, how many hockey players there are. To get nominated for that is very good achievement. And because of the success you had at Colgate, you end up, signing a pro contract, which I think anyone growing up playing hockey, their dream obviously first in the NHL, but to play pro is
Yeah.
obviously a great achievement. You make a jump to the AHL there, first with Hamilton, but then your first full season, I would say, was a Springfield Rochester. Like, how was the jump for you
Yeah.
going from college to pro?
It was a different time too. I mean, a much different time, but it was good. Like I think I could think the game pretty well. I wasn't the best skater, but I thought it well, and I found myself in a couple of good situations and put up some pretty good numbers for a few years. Yeah, it was good. I like the grind of it. I like the sacrifice. I like the suffering. That's kind of my makeup and my DNA. It's hard, but it's the hard that makes it so great, right? And I'll tell you what, like the AHL is a grind, especially back in the late 90s. It's a lot of 3-3s or 4-5, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday afternoon, and but I loved it. I had some great mentors, some great coaches along the way who I still keep in touch with. And when you're in that kind of grind, you make friends for life.
You mentioned too, like I that's what I call it too. I call it the grind.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. But one thing I wanted to kind of ask you about just is the mental side of it. So, for example, you get a couple years under your belt and then you play for the Rochester Americans. You're putting up
Mhm.
79 points in 79 games. So, a point per game, your best season by far, very good playoff run as well. Like, did you ever kind of feel, I would say, frustrated that you never got a look in the NHL, given the fact that you were putting up really good points in the league below it?
I mean, I think if you talk to any guy who did relatively well in the American League and didn't get a call up, they'll come up with an excuse or they'll talk about frustrations, but that's that's why we love this sport so much, right? You're not an elite athlete, and especially in hockey, without frustration. It's just there, frustration and anxiety. You feel all of it. So definitely, I was frustrated, certainly, but it was a different time. I'm average size, and again, I like I mentioned, I don't skate that well, but and I wasn't drafted, right? So like you need somebody to pull for you. You really do. And I didn't have that. And that's fine. I'm not making excuses. I've come to terms with it. It's totally fine. We have a sort of a trophy case here. It's more of a jersey case, I guess, with all the guys who've played in the NHL here. And I walk by it every single day. And so sometimes I look at it, I just wish, my name would be in there sometimes, but I get over it pretty quickly because now I'm excited to have players that I've coached and helped mentor that are in there. I get a lot more joy out of that for sure. I'm over it. I'm fine. Thanks for the therapy though. I appreciate it. I'll just keep telling myself I'm over it and I'm fine.
Hey, whatever helps. Well, one thing I thought was actually cool is the next season, which, not many people get to do in their life, and this was a common theme, I would say, in your career because it happened multiple times. You win the Calder Championship with Hartford. Win your last game of the season. That's the old saying. It's always good when you
Right.
do that. You want to just talk about kind of that season there and being able to win that championship?
Yeah, no, that was a great season. I mean, a lot of great friends too. And the Rangers, for whatever reason, they just wanted to load up their American League team. So they just signed a bunch of studs and it was great. It was really great. But learned a lot from that team for sure on how to win, how to do a lot of things, and then how to not do some things. We had a great coach in John Paddock, who I think his heart rate didn't get over 30 beats per minute. He was just great, but taught me a lot on how to handle a room and how to treat guys. And that was great. And he was an old Jets coach and GM before that too. So I had instant respect for him. I remember going to watch him coach a lot as a kid. But yeah, it was great. I didn't love the way it finished and beating Roch. I know how those guys, we went to the finals the year before with Rochester, and then they went to they ended up going to the finals twice and not winning. And that was tough. And I had some injuries that season too. So it wasn't super great personally, but how much fun to win. And like you said, to win your last game. It was great. It's a really unique group of guys for sure.
And then basically one more season you spent there in the AHL, and then you do what a lot of guys do. You make the venture over to Europe. You were fortunate enough to play in multiple
Mhm.
countries, which I always tell people if you can see the world and like, the what this game gives to us, it obviously gives you a living, but you also get to travel the world, travel through Europe, things that we might not have done without this sport. So you end up going your first year there to both Sweden and Finland. How was heading overseas for you? How was the adjustment? I mean, we all know it's different type of hockey, different living situations. Like, how was everything for you?
I loved every second of it. In fact, I couldn't wait when I was in Sweden, especially to just get out of practice, grab some lunch, and then come back to the rink and watch the youth hockey practices. Because this was in the early 2000s when, Sweden and Finland were absolutely killing it with their development. And it seemed like it was some well-kept secret because we weren't doing it in Canada and they weren't doing it in the US until, recently, 10 years ago or so, USA came up with their development model, which is borrowed mostly from the Swedes and the Finns. So I loved it. I was just loading up with ideas and taking notebooks full of notes, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I loved the way they taught the game. I loved the way they approached it. It was just great. And again, it was centered around play, which I think is everything. So I valued my time there a lot. Yeah, I loved it.
And another thing I thought cool, obviously myself working in Germany now, you end up making the trek over to Germany two different occasions. The first time you go to Frankfurt there, the Frankfurt Lions, and as I mentioned before, you a couple of years before won a championship in the AHL, and here in Frankfurt you end up winning a championship with Frankfurt. I believe too, this is maybe the year or two before they ended up going bankrupt and going down, or a couple of years later. But
That's right.
um, winning a championship in a city like Frankfurt, obviously that team had a lot of history.
Yeah.
How did you find the German hockey, and more importantly, how did you find the German beer?
Loved the latter. The former, it was an adjustment. I thought I was going to come in and light it up, and I mean, it's a great league. It's an amazing league. It's an older, smart league. And I really struggled. In fact, I had to sort of create a role for myself to even stay on that team. Offensively, I wasn't doing it, but I found a niche. And I tell this story to players sometimes that we coach. You have to have a role and you have to have a defined role and justify your existence. Mine was taking faceoffs. For whatever reason, I figured it out, and I was basically a FOGO, a face-off get-off, like a lacrosse guy. And Rich Chernomaz, the coach at the time, he would just throw me out there for important face-offs. And if it wasn't for that, I might not have been in the lineup. And then as the year went on, I built some confidence up, and I have a great run in the playoffs, and the goaltending's through the roof, and we win a championship, and that's great. But I remember, hating a lot of things, hating Lance Nethery, hated him. But he was right. You know what I mean? Like in the end, he was right. Like I had to figure out a way to justify my existence. Like, he was the GM and he would tell me like, I got to be better. And I was like, I hate you, but he was right. He was also a Cornell guy. That's why I probably didn't like him. But, and even Rich Chernomaz he'd be hard on me. And I get it. I get it now. I had to grow up a little bit um, but yeah, it was good, but a lot of lessons learned, and again, a great end, and some great friends there.
It's funny being on the other side of it now as a coach, what you
Right.
learn, and then you look back and go, "Oh, okay,
Right.
I get it now. I get it." Like
Right. It's
they
so
were right.
funny. It's so funny. Yeah.
One other cool thing, this is more just cool for me, it's kind of nostalgic. When you went to Ingolstadt, I believe a year or two later, you played with two people who, for me, were idols when I was a kid growing up because I grew up in Peterborough. So you played with Cameron Mann, who was the star guy in 1996 when they hosted the Mem Cup, and I remember him. And then obviously Jamie Langenbrunner came there for the lockout. How
Yeah.
was it playing with those guys? Obviously, to me, it probably means more than a lot of the listeners, but yeah, those guys are really idols for me growing up.
Yeah. Well, that was funny. That was a really funny time because it was during the lockout, and I was playing over here. I think it was in the East Coast League, maybe. I was playing over here, and they signed me as insurance because they thought the lockout would end and those guys would go back into the NHL. So they signed me, and then a couple weeks go by, and the lockout didn't end. So those guys stayed. So I was just kind of hanging out and like, almost as a practice guy. I played, but not much of a role. And I had that experience of winning the year before, so that came in handy for them, I think. And they wanted me as that role guy, but. It was just fun to be around those high level guys, obviously, like with a ton of NHL experience. And, I remember going out with those guys quite a bit. Aaron Ward was on that team too, and Wardo was a bit of a beauty. Um, so yeah, we had a lot of fun, a lot of fun. It was great.
I find that it's probably one of the craziest things to see how the game has changed because when you talk about anyone who played whatever it was NHL, DEL, whatever 15, 20 years ago, like it was all about the camaraderie, about
Mm.
the Cabina Fest, the going out to dinner together, going out to bars together, and
Right.
sometimes probably playing a little hungover. Like, and it's just, now it's a lot different. But it obviously because of that, it helped the bond grow tighter, and also the stories you get from it.
Mhm.
Right now on Netflix, I'm watching the Red Sox comeback story documentary,
Mhm.
and they're talking about the one year they win the what wild card game, and they're out at the bar with the fans like in their cleats, and it's just like the whole team's doing it. So it's crazy how tight they were.
Right. I remember a game we had when we were in Frankfurt. I think we took the train to Nuremberg, and then on the way back we took the train, but it was like with all the fans. We just went from car to car, and we're doing, keg stands and shots, and like it was insane. It was awesome. It was the biggest party ever. I'm not even sure if we won the game, but we must have won. But it was just a party. It was great.
You won the after game. That's all that matters.
That's for sure.
Um, Last thing I want to touch on, just kind of about your playing career. You end up going to I'm gonna butcher the name. I always say Alligator, but I'm
That's
probably
right.
wrong.
That's right.
Alligator.
That's
Okay,
right.
good. You went
Yeah,
there
yeah,
for
yeah.
4 years.
Yeah.
Living in Italy, getting paid to play hockey is probably not two sentences you thought you'd put together. But
Yeah.
yeah, how was your 4 years there? Obviously, it's a beautiful place. I had buddies who played there as well later down the
Yeah.
road and loved it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I probably should have retired, or I was told to retire, but I had the opportunity to go play in Italy. And my wife and I were at a place where like, let's just do something fun for a year. And then that year turned into 4 years. And it was great, great friends, great pizza, great wine, great everything. Like, and I loved it. And we became part of that community there. And I wanted to win for that community. We were close to winning. They hadn't won before. And I poured everything I had into it. It was a really, really fun challenge. But yeah, no regrets there. Loved it. Just keep playing as long as you can, really was the message there. And that's what I did.
I tell everyone that because you realize when you're out of it, and like coaching, managing, it's fun, it's great, but there's
Right.
nothing like being in that dressing room and putting the gear on.
No
But
doubt.
being in Italy, as you mentioned, it led to the start of your next career, which I thought was awesome. You ended up coaching there in
Yeah.
Cortina.
Mhm.
How did that opportunity come about? And also, did you always know, like you mentioned back when you played in Sweden, you'd go watch the
Mm.
youth practices and have a notebook and take notes on drills and stuff like that. Did you always know that whenever the time came to retire, you did want to stay involved in hockey and start in coaching?
Yeah, I think so. I think like it's that thing where you want to pass on that torch and you don't want it to be a candle. You want it to burn really brightly and like make it better and then pass it on for somebody else. And I just loved sharing my experiences with kids and mentoring kids. And now coaching young men. But yeah, I did. I always knew I wanted to be a coach. I probably spent a lot of time second guessing all of my coaches all the time and wondering why I wasn't on the 5-on-3 or on the power play more. So I was always trying to get in our coach's head. Um, but yeah, I think I knew I wanted to be a coach, and I knew I wanted to stay in Italy. So I got to know a guy, Stefan Meyer, who was coaching Cortina, and then he had this opportunity to help him coach and do some things in youth hockey there in Cortina, and it was fantastic. Yeah, no regrets there at all. But I did know I wanted to be a coach. I think it's great, and I love giving back to this great game that's given me so much for sure.
One other thing I have a lot of respect for in you doing is after Cortina, you come back to Colgate. Obviously, summer you went to school.
Hmm.
And a lot, I find this to be so true. Obviously, someone like myself, I had to work my way up and start in lower leagues in Germany to get to where I am now. But you had to start as a volunteer assistant coach, I believe, at Colgate, which the old saying, foot in the door,
Yeah.
but it's still the foot in the door, it's volunteer. So,
Mhm.
coming from playing pro hockey for years, coaching pro hockey, of getting
Yeah.
paid every year,
Yeah.
I believe you wouldn't have been getting paid as a volunteer. Like, can you
No.
talk about like what led you to that decision and to kind of, I wouldn't say gamble, but in a sense, like, hey, this is going to pay off for me if I do this?
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way at all. It was very short-sighted. All I cared about was Colgate. Like I'm a really proud Colgate alum. My wife's an alum. We're Colgate people. So I just wanted to give back. I really did. Again, I became good friends with Coach Vaughn after he coached me. I thought he was fantastic. He still comes by the office about once a week or so, once every couple of weeks to hang out and vent with me. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to give back. I just wanted to help. I loved it. I really didn't have any inclination of a full-time paid position, but then like anything, like you said, foot in the door. But um, I just wanted to see how it worked on that side of it, the college level. Again, I think I have ideas that that are maybe a little outside the box, and I like sharing those from all the European cities I played in and North American League cities. So I felt like I had something to give, and I wanted to give back to Colgate. Colgate was really, really good to me. I loved all my time here, and I still do. So I felt indebted, and I wanted to help. And that was it.
And even though you didn't mean it to be this way, but kind of what I said, that first year as a volunteer
Right,
still ended up paying off. You end up becoming the assistant coach the next season and staying for the next
right.
5 years as an assistant. Through those 5 years, obviously, I'm assuming being a sponge, obviously giving input, probably getting more and more responsibility each
Yeah.
season. At the end of the 5 years, did you feel yourself that you were ready to say, "Hey, I'm ready to be a head coach"?
It's so funny. Like I think for a lot of us, like after one or two games, you think you can be the head coach, like and realistically, of course not. There's so much that goes on with it. And Vonner just he's so unique and great that he had it all under control in such a great way. So no, it was definitely it's intimidating to be able to think you could just take it over for sure. There's always, my guys do it all the time. They're across the hall right now, and I'm sure they're thinking I'm an idiot for some things I do, and they would do it differently. But until you actually sit in this chair, it's a lot harder. So no, I had no inclination. I just love building. I love the idea of recruiting and trying to make this place better. And Colgate's a unique place. So I think having an alum either on the staff as an assistant or a head coach, it's important because there's certain kinds of kids that can thrive here and some that can't. Like any place, I'm sure. So to find those perfect Colgate kids, it's a challenge and it's fun. Yeah.
Before we get into, you becoming the head coach at Colgate, which is you're obviously in your second year, as I mentioned, you had to take kind of I don't want to say step back, but you had to go somewhere else to become a head coach. So you went to the Reno Ice there, which is, I believe, in the United States, like high school hockey, which obviously very popular in the States. Did you feel your time there? You kind of were able to mold like how you would want to be as a head coach if you ever went back to the NCAA route or major junior or whatever the next plan would have been?
Yeah. Again, like no plan. I went to Reno. We just moved out to Reno. I went there. My wife took a great job. I went there to golf and snowboard. Hopefully, all in the same day. You can do that there. It's pretty great. Um, it's in the mountains there. It's a great town. And then I quickly met a guy from Boston who was trying to build a rink. There's no rink. A town of 500,000 people, no ice rink, and it's a winter sports place. I mean, they had the Olympics there in '64, I think it was. Um, but yeah, so I fell right into hockey. He was like, "Wait, what? You're a Division One coach or a former Division One coach? Let's start a hockey program." So we fundraised, we built a rink. He did it mostly his own, and then I started the youth hockey organization, and it was just great. But it taught me a lot about building, about raising money, about how to deal with people. It's skills I use all the time now, dealing with alums, dealing with administrators, and recruiting, obviously. So I went there with no intention of being involved with hockey at all. And then, working 20 hours a day, building a program. And of course, staying in touch with the program here, staying in touch with Vonner and the guys, because I knew them all really well and recruited most of them. So staying in touch, coming out and visiting, watching games. But yeah, I poured everything I had into building a hockey program in Reno, Nevada. It sounds weird, but Yeah, it was probably my greatest challenge really. And the program's thriving now. It's awesome. And I follow them every weekend. I'm, following, seeing how they're doing and talking to the coaches.
That must be something really special to you, knowing that you really helped build that program from the ground up, literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe there's a side of you that's mad that it got in the way of your golf and snowboarding
No,
time, but
I'm not a very good golfer or snowboarder, so yeah, it's fine.
well, if you didn't have this program, you would have been, obviously.
No,
So,
clearly I would have been. Yeah.
um, then after there, we've come to where you are now. Like, how did the head coaching position become available to you at Colgate? Because obviously, you've mentioned multiple times you're a very
Yeah.
proud alumni, and
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
chance you could be
Yeah.
could get to be the head coach. I mean, I'm sure you would have taken it, and you obviously have.
Yeah, I think I was just lucky enough to be considered. I was just in the mix because I'm always kind of in the mix here. And um, yeah, a good friend of ours, his I guess his father passed away. And we came back for the funeral, and it was during this time, and it was just weird. Our car broke down; it wouldn't start, so we had to stay an extra few hours and had breakfast with some people. And before you knew it, I was interviewing for the job, and it seemed like a perfect fit. And now I'm back. So it seemed somewhat serendipitous, but at the same time, I think I think it was always in the cards. I really do. Like I just right from the minute I took my visit here, right until today, it feels like home. It really does.
That's I mean that's crazy to hear, but like those stories I think are
Right.
awesome because at the end of the day you want to be doing something you have a passion for and you have an ultimate passion for Colgate University and obviously
Right.
Colgate hockey.
Yeah.
Um, speaking of Colgate hockey and a passion for being there, what types of players do you
Mm.
look to recruit at Colgate University?
Yeah, I think it's common. I wonder how common it is. I talked to other guys about this, but you try to recruit guys in your image sometimes, because it's just easier to relate to them, or at least the image that you project to have. Um, I project to be, I probably think I was a lot better or tougher than I actually was. But I like to get guys with a high compete. Definitely that's probably the most important thing. But parenthetically with attitude of play, like just a good disposition, kids that can really go after the puck. It's their puck. They can keep it for 10, 12 seconds on their stick, make moves, make plays, and then go get it again if they lose it, and be really angry about it. So tough in a way. I always talk about toughness because I always, when we don't do well, I think it's because we're not tough enough or hard enough. And I tell a story about a guy I played with in Rochester, Craig Fisher. He should have played. I mean, if you're playing now, he should have 1,000 NHL games, but it's just a different time. And I think the knock on Craig Fisher was that he was too soft. He was a big kid that went to University of Miami, Ohio, then signed with the Flyers. I don't know if you know him at all, but Ontario kid. Um, but there's nobody tougher. Like Craig Fisher would take that puck to the net every single time. And he scored a ton in the American League and the IHL, but he would get whacked and hacked and punched and destroyed. But he'd get up and do it again and again and again. And that's tough. So those are the kinds of guys that I look for. Like, sure, you need your 6'4" D that can throw the body around a little bit, and that's tough too. But the guys, the Craig Fisher type guys, or the guys that, think the game and like to play as much as I do, those are the kids I look for.
Need that fearless grit, man. Like willing to
Yeah,
go to
that's
the heart,
exactly it.
willing to go to
Of
the hard
course,
areas.
of course, it's more complicated than that because, it's hard recruiting. One, you need kids that academically can get in here. I'm always operating under a salary cap, right? We have 18 scholarships, so there's always trying to work that salary cap part of it, which is hard. Um, and you just try to get the kids that are playing the highest level too. So there's a lot, but the Craig Fishers of the world are for me for sure.
Speaking of kind of recruitment, as well, we talked about this off camera, and I'm gonna bring it up now. You know, I'll say rumored because it's not official yet, but I believe it's gonna happen where the
Mm,
CHL kids are gonna still have eligibility to go NCAA, which is obviously very new and different from anything that me or
yeah,
you grew up with.
right.
What are kind of your thoughts on it? And like, could you maybe if you're kind of like undecided, you like make points for where it's
Yeah,
positive for one side, positive for the other, negative for one side, negative for the other?
yeah. It's hard because I try not to get too emotional about it because I think college hockey is winning. I think we're winning. I think it's the right route. It's not for everybody, but I think education is important. I think education is power. I think it opens doors. Um, I think it's great, but again, it's not for everybody. But my opinion doesn't really matter. It's happening, or at least it looks like it's happening, right? So it's a whole new strange world we're about to enter. Um, I think on the college side, if you look at our league, the ECAC, there's us, the six Ivies, Union. There's some schools where it's going to be hard to get kids in, right? I've already had conversations with some kids, um, and they're just like, coach, it's school's not that important to me. Like I'm like, well, we'd like to get you in. Can you send me your high school transcript? And they're like, it's not very good. And I get it. They've had to play 72 games. They'll miss weeks of school. Like it's hard. It's a really hard balance, right? Not that they're dumb kids by any means or low achievers, but school just wasn't emphasized. So it's going to be hard for the ECAC to get kids in, I think. So it's not going to benefit us that much. It will make college hockey better because we're going to get those 20-year-olds that were draft picks or that are really great players, but they're either undersized or for whatever reason, they're not signing in the NHL. A fifth rounder or a sixth rounder might not sign. So our league, the NCAA is going to get better. What I do lament a little bit is it's some kids are going to get squeezed. Kids that are committed now for a year or two, 3 years down the road, they might get decommitted, and that's pretty ugly. Um, Not something anybody wants to do or have done to them, but there are essentially 1,400, 1,500 new kids on the market, 60, 60 times 23 kids, 60 CHL teams. There's a lot of new kids flooding the market. Not all of those kids will want to go to college. A lot of them will go to the NHL or pro at some level, but it's a lot of kids to look at. So it's a lot more work for us. Our staff isn't growing, nobody's staff is growing. And then what does it mean to the kids that are already committed? What does it mean to some other leagues, right? We might just be a four-league um, organization now that we recruit from, right? It might just be the USHL, the Western League, the O, and the Q. It might happen really quickly. So there's a lot to consider, but again, it's happening, right? If you can pay quarterbacks $5 million, why can't you have a kid from the Western League come in who made a couple $100? So um, uh, we're going to adjust, right? Evolve or die. So we have to figure it out. I'm actually going up to my first CHL games this weekend. We have a bye week, so I haven't seen a CHL game since maybe Brandon Wheat Kings in like 1989 or something. I think Brad McCrimmon or somebody was playing, who was a great player. But yeah, it's interesting. Definitely a whole new world. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the things I thought of right away is like how the tier two junior leagues are gonna change because before it was always you'd go to those leagues to keep your eligibility, but now if it doesn't matter, maybe you
Right.
try the OHL for a year or two if you can, or go to a camp and stay longer, and then it doesn't matter anymore. There ain't gonna be any rules. So I'm curious
Yeah.
how that goes.
Yeah. No, as am I. As am I. Yeah. Um, yeah. And again, it comes back to are we expanding hockey? Like I always think about it from a builder's perspective, right? There are a lot of kids that, you know, the Western League was a good fit for them, and that's great. Now they can do both. So are we squeezing some kids? We have Bobby McMahon is a great example for us. He's playing for the Leafs now. He was a 2020 grad. We got him out of Bonneville. He was playing in the AJ. Really good tier two junior player in the Alberta League. But does Bobby McMahon play Division One hockey if, because he's a late bloomer, if the Western League kids were eligible, right? We might not have recruited Bobby, even though he was good and he developed here. He became a really good player here and then continued to develop. Now he's in the NHL. But does Bobby make it to the NHL with this new rule, right? I don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he plays in the Western League before that. But there are a lot of late bloomers in the NHL that would not have gone. So are we doing a disservice by constricting the pool of players? Unless the NCAA can grow and grow rapidly. If we could add 10 more teams next week, that would be great.
hmm
Right? But that's unlikely to happen.
No, I think it's as I mentioned to you before, like whoever you talk to is going to have their own opinion, and I don't think it's ever going to be a right. There's going to be one set answer on if it's good or bad. But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it's going to happen, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Two
Right.
more questions for you here because you got to run to a meeting here, as you mentioned. Do you have any like personal or future goals you like to achieve? Like maybe something you see for yourself in 5 to 10 years? Obviously, I know you're a very proud Colgate guy, and if you could stay there
Yeah.
for the rest of your life, I think that's
Mhm.
something you'd definitely entertain. But I didn't know if maybe you ever thought of the pro game or something like that.
I don't, again, like I'm not the kind of guy that thinks like that far out. I'm like, I live where my feet are, I really do. Um, yeah, I'm just trying every day. We come up with solutions, and I love our staff here. We have a ton of fun, but I just want to build something special here for Colgate at Colgate. If Colgate could become a place where it's really hard to win, and there's some recognition about how good we are year after year after year, and a place where kids want to come and develop into a pro. That that would be amazing. That's what I want to do, and that's what we try to do all the time. Like today, we're on the ice all day today with small groups. Monday's a good development day for us, and just skill work, skill work, skill work. We want to develop pros, and if we're doing that, we're probably winning hockey games. So. Um, that's really it.
They normally go hand in hand, so I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, Last one here. Always end on this question. I like to ask my guests this.
Hmm.
What is one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice, if you have it, that you would give the younger generation?
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it might be somewhat contradictory. But one is always play. Like you play hockey, right? You don't work hockey. Nobody says you're going to work hockey. You play it. It's a sport. So keep that in mind. Always have that attitude. Um, and then the second thing is if you're not willing to sacrifice and suffer, you're probably going to fall short of meeting your goals. Like you just will. If you're not going to block a shot, you might not be on the penalty kill. You might not get that extra ice time. If you're not going to go to bed early and sacrifice some social things with your buddies, you might not make that team. If you're not going to spend that extra time in the gym, you might not get bigger, right? So those two things, although contradictory, two really important things to keep in mind.
Sacrifice now so you can have fun later. So, um, no, that's really good. I think that's a great way to end this. I appreciate you taking the time doing this. As you mentioned, you got to run to a meeting.
Yeah.
Um, I wish you guys all the best. Obviously, you're someone who's very passionate about the Colgate program, and I have a lot of respect for that, and someone who, wears that C on their heart. Obviously, as I mentioned, my memories there aren't so great, but
Sorry, Andrew.
we'll let that one go. But I wish you guys the best this season. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your words of wisdom with us.
Yeah, I appreciate the show. And again, you're building too. So thank you so much, and good luck in Mannheim the rest of the way.
Thanks a lot. And for those listening, until next week, cheers and ciao.